October 22nd, 1989 began like any other Sunday in St. Joseph, Minnesota. Church in the morning, football on TV, the quiet rhythm of a rural town settling in for the week ahead. With only about 2,000 residents, St. Joseph wasn't a place where people thought about much danger. Kids biked country roads, parents called them in when the porch lights came on, and life felt predictable in the way only small towns can. For 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling, it was a perfect night for a quick adventure. Jacob was the second of 4 kids in Patty and Jerry Wetterling's busy household, an outgoing, grinning boy who loved hockey, soccer, and making people laugh. To his friends, he was the kid you wanted around. To his parents, he was the boy who could light up a room just by walking into it. That night, Jacob, his younger brother Trevor, and their best friend Aaron decided to ride their bikes to the Tom Thumb convenience store less than a mile away. Armed with flashlights taped to their handlebars, they set off down the gravel road. They rented a movie, The Naked Gun, and bought a little candy. Just 3 boys making the most of a Sunday night. By the time they started pedaling back home, it was nearly 9 p.m. The fields around them were swallowed in darkness, the kind of pitch black only the countryside knows. The beam of their flashlights cut thin lines through the corn, and the steady crunch of their tires on gravel filled the silence. They were laughing, nearly home when the night split open. A man stepped out from the rows of corn, his figure suddenly blocking the road. In an instant, the ordinary Sunday night turned into the moment that would haunt Minnesota for decades. At first, the boys barely registered the figure in the road. Just a man standing still in the beam of their flashlights. For a split second, they thought maybe it was a neighbor or someone out walking. But then he spoke.
"Stop right there."
The voice was sharp, commanding, not a request, but an order. The boys skidded to a halt, bikes wobbling under them. Gravel crunched. The night suddenly felt heavier. The man wore dark clothing, his face obscured by the shadows. He held something in his hand, a gun. He told them to lie face down in the ditch. Their hearts hammered, breaths shallow, as they dropped their bikes and scrambled into the dirt. Corn stalks rattled overhead in the night breeze. Aaron could feel the grit of gravel against his cheek. Trevor fought the urge to cry. Jacob lay perfectly still, doing what he was told. The man asked their ages. One by one, they answered. 10, 11. There was a long pause. Then he ordered Trevor and Aaron to run back into the woods and not look back, or he would shoot. They scrambled up, stumbling into the blackness, their legs pumping, lungs burning. Behind them, Jacob stayed. The last thing they heard was Jacob's voice, faint and small, and the sound of a man's footsteps retreating into the dark. Trevor and Aaron ran like their lives depended on it, because it did. Branches clawed at their jackets as they tore through the dark, gravel cutting into their sneakers. Neither boy dared to look back. The man's warnings echoed in their ears. Don't turn around. Don't stop. They finally stumbled into the driveway of the Wetterling home. They were breathless. Their words tumbled over each other in panic. Patty and Jerry looked up, confused at first, then horrified as the story spilled out. A man with a gun, Jacob taken, gone into the night. Patty grabbed the phone. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what had happened. Her son had been abducted less than a mile from their door. Within minutes, the quiet farm town of St. Joseph lit up with squad cars. Red and blue lights flashed against the cornfields as officers rushed to the gravel road. When police arrived at the scene, they found the boys' bicycles scattered in the ditch. Flashlights still strapped to the handlebars cut pale beams across the gravel. The one belonging to Jacob lay silent, abandoned, marking the place where childhood had ended in an instant. Within minutes of Patty's 911 call, the gravel roads around St. Joseph filled with flashing lights. Squad cars fanned out in every direction, headlights sweeping over ditches and fields. Officers set up roadblocks, stopping every vehicle that passed, hoping the abductor might still be nearby. Search dogs were brought in, straining at their leashes as handlers led them through the cornfields and along the gravel shoulders. For a moment, it seemed like they had a trail. Paw prints, tire marks, impressions in the dirt, but nothing solid emerged. The fields were too vast, the night too dark. Neighbors joined in, leaving their homes to comb through the barns, sheds, and backyards. Some carried flashlights, others simply walked into the fields, calling Jacob's name into the blackness. But the night gave nothing back. At the Wetterling home, Patty and Jerry waited, surrounded by family and friends who gathered in shock. Every time headlights slowed in the front of the house, their hearts leapt. Maybe it was Jacob. Maybe he was coming back. But the cars that stopped only brought more officers, more questions, more dread. By dawn, there was still no sign of him. The gravel road where the boys had been stopped looked unchanged, except for the tire tracks and footprints pressed into the dirt by the night-long search. Jacob's bike had been collected, tagged as evidence, but Jacob himself had vanished into the dark, leaving behind nothing but silence. By Monday morning, word of Jacob's disappearance had spread far beyond St. Joseph. What began as a frantic local search quickly grew into one of the largest investigations Minnesota had ever seen. Hundreds of volunteers poured into town. Farmers, teachers, students, parents, all willing to walk fields and drainages, shoulder to shoulder, looking for any sign of the boy. Search grids were drawn across miles of farmland, cornfields, and wooded lots. Helicopters flew overhead, their rotors thundering across the countryside as they scanned with spotlights. The FBI arrived within 24 hours. Agents set up a command post and began treating the case as an abduction by a stranger, something far rarer and more terrifying than a family dispute or runaway. Agents questioned neighbors, stopping drivers on the road that Sunday night, compiling a list of every suspicious car or unfamiliar face. Tips flooded in. Jacob had been seen at a gas station in Minneapolis, at a rest stop off I-94, in towns as far as North Dakota. Each call was logged, each one checked, but none panned out. Meanwhile, the Wetterling home became the center of gravity. Reporters camped outside, cameras rolling, asking Patty and Jerry to relive the horror again and again. Their faces, pleading, hollowed by fear, became etched into the nightly news. Patty made appeals directly to the abductor. Please let Jacob go. Please bring him home. The town itself transformed. Doors that had never been locked were bolted shut. Children who once rode bikes freely were suddenly kept indoors. Parents walked their kids to school, clutched them tighter in the grocery store aisles. In St. Joseph, the idea of safety had been stolen along with Jacob. And yet, despite the hundreds of searchers, the helicopters, the dogs, the FBI agents, Jacob was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had been swallowed by the dark. In the days after Jacob vanished, investigators scrambled to identify who could have ambushed 3 boys on a quiet gravel road. They started closer to home, questioning known troublemakers in Stearns County, men with records of violence or histories that made them stand out in a town where most people lived quiet, ordinary lives. One of the first serious suspects was a man named Dan Racer, who lived on the very road where Jacob was taken. He told police he'd been home alone that night, listening to records. Detectives searched his property, even brought in dogs. For years, suspicion hovered over him. Whispers in town, media attention, despite no physical evidence ever connecting him to the abduction. There were other men too. A drifter picked up for questioning in a nearby county after boasting that he knew something about Jacob's disappearance. Another local man with a reputation for inappropriate behavior toward children was interviewed repeatedly. Again, no evidence. The strongest early theory was that Jacob's abductor wasn't a stranger passing through, but someone familiar with the area. Someone who knew the roads, the ditches, the exact path the boys would take home that night. That possibility chilled investigators because it meant the suspect could be a neighbor, a co-worker, a face seen every Sunday in church. For every man questioned, another tip came in. Cars seen driving too slow at night, a figure spotted walking along the road. Each lead carried a glimmer of hope, only to collapse into another dead end. Meanwhile, the Wetterling family endured the cruelest part of all, living among people who might know what happened. Every knock at the door could have been news. Every face in town could have been Jacob's abductor. As months turned into years, the investigation consumed everything in its path. Detectives chased thousands of leads, tips from psychics, sightings across state lines, anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. But Jacob never came home. For Jacob's family, life was split in two, before October 22nd and after. The house, once loud with the chaos of 4 kids, felt quieter and emptier with each passing day. Jerry focused on holding the family together, raising Jacob's siblings while carrying the weight of absence. Patty became the face of the search. She stood before cameras on national television, pleading for answers, demanding action, and refusing to let Jacob's name fade from the headlines. Her grief became public, her determination unrelenting. Out of that determination came change. Their pain turned into advocacy, reshaping the country. In 1994, Congress passed Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act, the first federal law requiring sex offenders to register with law enforcement. It became the foundation for what we now know as the National Sex Offender Registry, followed by Megan's Law and others. What began on a dark gravel road in rural Minnesota altered how America thought about safety, crime, and children. And yet, for the Wetterlings, it was deeply personal. Legislation couldn't answer the question that haunted their home every night. They had changed the nation, but they still didn't know where their son was. For nearly 27 years, Jacob's case sat in that unbearable limbo. Always present, never solved. Then, in 2016, a name that had floated in and out of the investigation for decades resurfaced: Henry Heinrich. Heinrich had long been on law enforcement's radar. He lived nearby Painesville and had a history of troubling behavior around children. He'd even been questioned in the early 90s, but without solid evidence, the trail had gone cold. For years, he was just another name in the files. That changed when investigators revisited old evidence with new forensic tools. A hair fiber linked to Heinrich and the 1989 abduction of another Minnesota boy, Jared, who had been kidnapped and assaulted just months before Jacob disappeared. The cases suddenly snapped together like pieces of a puzzle that had been sitting unsolved for decades. In 2016, federal agents raided the home of Heinrich and uncovered a vast collection of child pornography. Facing what could have been decades in prison, Heinrich agreed to a deal. He would finally confess to Jacob Wetterling's abduction and murder in exchange for a lighter sentence on the pornography charges. In court, Heinrich recounted the night with chilling precision. He admitted stepping out of the darkness with his revolver, forcing the three boys off their bikes. He admitted asking their ages, then choosing Jacob. He described driving the 11-year-old to a gravel pit near Painesville where he assaulted him. Jacob pleaded with him. He asked what would happen. He asked if he could go home. But Heinrich panicked. He feared Jacob could identify his car, that he would be caught. So he raised the revolver and pulled the trigger. He buried Jacob in a shallow grave near the pit. Months later, terrified the site might be discovered, he returned, dug up the remains, and moved him to a farm field. For nearly 27 years, Jacob lay hidden there, his family and community left without answers. In September 2016, Heinrich led investigators to that exact spot. There, they recovered Jacob's remains, along with the red jacket and clothing he had worn the night he disappeared. After nearly 3 decades, the truth was finally unearthed, ending the mystery, but delivering the kind of closure no parent wants. In November 2016, Danny Heinrich stood in a federal courtroom to be sentenced. Because of the plea deal, he was charged with only possession of child pornography. 25 years in prison for taking Jacob's life. There would be no murder trial, no jury, no life sentence. The deal was the only way the investigators had secured the truth and brought Jacob home. But to many, it felt like a bitter compromise. When the judge handed down the 25-year sentence, Patty told the court, "We got the truth. We got our son home, but the price was too high." The family left the courtroom knowing Jacob's killer would spend years behind bars, but also knowing it could never balance what had been stolen from them. Outside the courthouse, the community had prayed, searched, and marched for Jacob for 27 years, gathered in grief and relief. They had an answer. They had a grave to visit, but the outcome was cruelly final. His name became a thread woven through every childhood in the 1990s, a story whispered at sleepovers, repeated as a warning, proof that even in the safest places, monsters could appear. Today in St. Joseph, a memorial stands in his honor. Etched in stone are the words, "Hope is not enough." Because Jacob's story reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying moments don't unfold in dark alleys or big cities. They happen on quiet gravel roads in places where nothing bad was ever supposed to happen.